welcome back to the Hi, welcome back to the second episode of Rebecca in Audio, the official podcast for RebeccaInPrint.com. As I said, this is the second episode of the podcast. If you'd like to catch up with the first one, the real story of Anastasia, you can do so. And we'll be waiting right here for you to get back. But if the title of this one interested you specifically, stick around. I'm very excited to have you here, and we will get straight into it. Again, there was a bit of a debate about what this podcast episode should be about, because the last one was about the most popular post on the website. And once you've done the most popular, it can only go downwards from there, let's be honest. So I'm picking a post that's quite new to the website, but I really enjoyed writing it, and it's something that I want to write more about. I'm not sure whether I might end up doing like a little mini ebook about the topic in general, because it's just something I find fascinating, and it's a film that a lot of people connect with, and I know a lot of people have seen and still watch to this day. So I'm going to do today the Lore Explained post about the Labyrinth, and whether or not the Labyrinth was real, or whether it was just a figment of Sarah's imagination. So get your coffee, put your washing on, jump in the car, whatever you happen to be doing, and let's talk about David Bowie in really tight trousers, because who wouldn't want to do that? Here is Lore Explained. Was the Labyrinth real? I just want to preface this by saying I know people have released and published comics, books, etc. from the Labyrinth universe. To get to the truest answer of the lore, we are only going to use what we know as canon. So it's either going to be from the film itself, or from what someone who made the film and worked on the film has declared in interviews, etc. So that's my disclaimer. I am disclaimed. If you haven't watched The Labyrinth, basically there's a teenage girl called Sarah. She's fed up of being asked to babysit her baby brother Toby. She, in a moment of frustration, asks the Goblin King to come and take Toby away. Toby gets taken by the Goblin King, be careful what you ask for. He turns up, Jareth, the Goblin King, David Bowie, in very tight pants and fantastic hair, and says, you can have the baby back, but you have to travel through my labyrinth, get to the kingdom at the other side, and you have 13 hours. Sarah cracks on with this, meets loads of things, solves loads of riddles, she gets to the other side, and that's basically of the general story. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it, because it's great. It's pure 80s magic, but that is the general gist of it. One of the most persistent questions about Labyrinth is whether the Labyrinth itself actually existed, or whether everything Sarah experienced was simply in her imagination. It's very Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, where you sit and question whether these things actually happened. Was it just a mental state? Was it their imagination? Were they on drugs? What actually happened? And I feel like that's a lot in the 80s movies we watched as children. We just took it as sort of a fantasy movie with these things happen. We didn't really question it too much. But when you watch it back as an adult, you think, hey, hang on, was that real? Was it not? What was actually going on? And honestly, you can kind of see when you watch it why people are confused, because we have this starting, basically she's in her bedroom, which is cue for dreamlike sequences in films all the time, and then it's the night time. It's kind of like very fantasy driven. The film itself is very dreamlike. There's a lot of dreamlike sequences, and then it ends with this big emotional closure that could kind of read as she grew up and moved on. But here is the thing. According to the people who made the film, the Labyrinth is real. Not symbolic, not imaginary, not a dream sequence or a metaphor. It is a real fairy realm. And once you accept that, the Labyrinth becomes a completely different story. So let's start with why this debate even exists in the first place. The film begins in the most grounded way possible. Sarah is literally just in her bedroom. We see her books, her props, her costumes, her posters, her board game. And then you start to realise, maybe in the beginning of the film, if it's your first time watching it, you might not realise. But when you watch it again, or at the end, when she's sat at her mirror, you can really see all the things. There's a Labyrinth board game. Props from her fantasy world actually tie back to props that will be used in the Labyrinth. There's teddies of characters that she meets within the Labyrinth. And again, it's very reminiscent of the Wizard of Oz film with Judy Garland in it, where they changed it so that people that worked on her farm, lived around her farm, people she met before she went to Oz, are the people that turn up in Oz. And it ties it back to that. Is it real or is it not? Because things that appear in her real world also appear in whatever fantasy land she goes to. And it kind of merges the two just enough to keep you questioning. Just before she gets to her bedroom, we see her outside and she's performing this dramatic monologue. And the dramatic monologue basically turns out to be things that she needs to say to either make Jareth arrive or to say that you have no power over me, you can go away. Which is another thing that just confuses and merges the worlds, because how is she... This is the thing that always confused me as a child the most. How does she know what she needs to say to the Goblin King out of the book she's reading? Like, is the book she's reading about the Goblin King? Is it the same story? Is it... it just really confused me as a child. So she's basically reciting this dramatic fantasy monologue, and then all of a sudden, a few minutes later, after she's sworn her baby brother to the Goblin King, the fantasy that she's monologuing about arrives. So it's natural for the viewers to go, oh, okay, so she invented this world, as I did as a child. I thought, well, she's invented this world in her head filled with all the things, her monologues, her toys, her games. She's made it all up. And the way the Labyrinth itself is so psychologically perfect, because the film is supposed to be about Sarah coming into adolescence and really struggling against that. And every challenge Sarah faces in the Labyrinth maps beautifully onto the struggles of coming into adolescence. But obviously as a child, when you're watching it, you just see goblins and a man with crazy hair and owls and clocks. And if anyone else watches Stranger Things and hears the clocks and thinks of Labyrinth, you are not alone. I also did that. But as a child watching it, you don't really understand the adolescence things, so you're either watching it at face value as a fantasy film, or you're just like me, slightly confused. I think even though my whole childhood was spent with them, I think fantasy films kind of confused me anyway. Because even though I had a really good imagination, I was also a really factual child. And things in fantasy films, I was like, Drop Dead Fred really confused me. Because I was like, if he's an imaginary friend, then how did certain things happen? And like Neverending Story, I couldn't quite grasp until I was an adult. Maybe I was just a really stupid child who didn't understand things. But I was really confused in general by some fantasy concepts in films, not just this one. But when you watch Labyrinth back as an adult and you see the journey she takes, you could be very forgiven for thinking that it is an imaginary journey. But the writers didn't write it that way, and that's where it gets really interesting. So I keep saying the creators and the writers, but who are we actually talking about? I'm going to go through who they are so that we have some context a little bit later when I say things about so-and-so said this or that. So first up is Jim Henson. And if you don't know who Jim Henson is, he's basically fantasy royalty, especially in the 80s. He is creator of The Muppets, the mind behind The Dark Crystal, another fantastic fantasy film, and the founder of the Jim Henson Company. But aside from puppets, he was also deeply interested in folklore and fairy tales, and he loved stories where fantasy had real consequences. Jim Henson was very clear in interviews and behind-the-scenes discussions that the Labyrinth is not just in Sarah's imagination, because if it were, nothing that happened there would really matter. It would cheapen the story. It would make it a coming-of-age fantasy that disappears when you wake up. And Henson, he didn't want it. Didn't want it to be like that. He wanted the fantasy to be real and meaningful while still mirroring real human emotions. Then you've got Brian Froud. I'm going to pronounce it as Froud. If it's not meant to be Froud, I apologise. But from episode 1, me and names, we do not get on. So we're going to go with Froud throughout this podcast, okay? Thank you. He is one of the most important names in this whole fantasy world. Brian Froud is a British fantasy illustrator and conceptual designer. He designed the look and the folklore vibe of Labyrinth and the Dark Crystal. And if you've ever thought the goblins feel like actual fairy folk, then that's all down to him. They're not designed to look like movie monsters. They are designed to look, if you think of what a goblin would look like, that is what it will be. And to be fair now, because we all watch that film, when we think of goblins, that is what we think of anyway. So it's kind of like, chicken and egg for goblins. Goblin eggs. Goblin chickens? Froud has talked loads over the years about how Labyrinth operates on fairy rules. Not human rules, not moral rules that we would go by, fairy rules. And fairy rules, if you've ever looked into folklore, fairy lore, Celtic fairy lore is especially amazing, you will know that fairy lands and realms have very specific rules. And that matters because in fairy stories, the magical realm isn't imaginary, it's other. It exists alongside ours. It bleeds into ours. Stories and myths are basically the way humans see into it. It's very Shakespearean Midsummer Night's Dream. Finally, we have Terry Jones. An easy name. Thanks, Terry. And yes, you may be thinking you know the name Terry Jones. He is Terry Jones from Monty Python. Terry Jones is a screenwriter for Labyrinth, and his voice is all over it in the best way. The humour, the sideways logic, the slightly cruel dialogue, the little adult winks with jokes, the way characters speak like they're trying to trap you with their words. In interviews, Jones has spoken about Jareth quite a few times, and he's made it very clear that Jareth can't just win by force. This isn't a story where the villain kills the hero. It's a fairy tale, and it's about temptation, consent, trickery and bargains, again going back to Froud's fairy rules. So between Henson, Froud and Jones, the message is surprisingly consistent. The labyrinth is real, but it's also psychological. It's not either or, it's both. This is the part where it gets even more entangled, because if the labyrinth is real, then we have to ask, how did Sarah know how to trigger it? How does she know what to say to get Jareth to take Toby? Because we literally see the goblins. Sarah's in the room. She's saying, oh, please come and take this baby away. And she's not getting the phrase right. And we see the goblins say, that's not the right words. Where did she learn those words from? Silly girl. Those aren't the correct words. Which leads us to think that there are specific words. But how does Sarah know them? And the answer is, she doesn't. She doesn't know that they're the right words. She just says them. Out of pure frustration, pure annoyance, pure anger, whatever you want to call it, she just accidentally says the wrong words. Or the right words, depending on which way you see it. And honestly, that is peak fairy lore. They're just waiting on the other side of the little shadow between the realms for you to say the correct thing, and then they're there. Because the entire horror of fairies is that they exploit human weakness. They exploit exhaustion, frustration, anger. They exploit those moments when you want relief so badly you'd give literally anything. I highly recommend, by the way, if you're really into this topic, that you either read the book or go watch the television show, because it was done equally as good, which is a surprise, of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, because it is so good and it is just teeming with folklore, and it explains some of the things that we're talking about here really well, and it shows them really well. So if you're interested in this topic, that is a recommendation from me. You're welcome. But back to Sarah giving up her baby brother. She is there, she's frustrated. The fairies are waiting for their perfect moment, for when Sarah just wants relief and she's willing to give anything, and she does. Just for that second, just long enough. And it's not magic language, it's not a spell, it's just complete surrender. and the fairy kingdom on the other side of the veil is in. The door is open. She's given up responsibility to the baby. Baby is there, being taken. Dun dun dun. And also, as equally important to fairy lore is that Sarah doesn't create the bargain. Jareth does. He appears in magnificent trousers and he formalises it. Can you tell I'm really hung up on the trousers? They are just something special. He, as a fairy king, tells her the rules, he tells her the consequences, and he sets that 13-hour time limit. They are again extremely fairy tale. Humans don't need to know the laws, fairies enforce them, and you will agree, or the baby, gone. Sarah is trapped in a contract she didn't read, because the contract is ancient, magical, and the person offering it is a literal fairy king with excellent cheekbones. Sarah's not special here. She's simply someone who has accidentally opened the door. Although there is the argument to be made that Sarah is actually special, and that he's been watching her for a while because she represents something he wants, or he can see that she's coming to the point of giving up a baby, which he obviously wants the baby. We'll talk about why in just a little while. And the goblins make it sound like they've been watching her. So there is the argument to be made that maybe she is a little bit special for reasons unknown to us, but maybe they are known to the goblins. Another reason that the labyrinth is real is because it doesn't follow imagination rules. When you are in a dream, certain things that happen in reality don't happen. And it's not something you think about while you're in your dream. You don't think, hey, it's been 3 days. I haven't eaten anything. Hey, how did I get from here to there? In dreams, it just happens and you don't really think about it. But when you wake up, you're like, that was weird. Nothing like that happens in the labyrinth. Everything is very mapped out. Everything is very logical. There's steps from one place to the next. There's no dream-like hopping around. Sarah gets hungry. Sarah gets injured. Her progress has physical cost. She gets exhausted. These are very realistic things. The creatures have their own logic. They interact with each other without Sarah. Jareth moves pieces around on the board while she's completely somewhere else. It's not all happening from Sarah's point of view where we only see things that she can see. There are other things happening in the labyrinth without her. We see Jareth talking to Hoggle at one point. We wouldn't be able to see that without Sarah if it was her dream and we only saw what she saw. And this is where Jim Henson's intent really comes through. He didn't want and then she woke up. It was all a dream. Because dreams don't have consequences. But this story really does. And if you think about it, it's actually darker than it looks, because it also means that Toby is in actual real danger. Toby's danger is real. It means goblins stealing babies is real. It means Sarah's words almost really permanently cost her actual brother. Which makes her look not very nice really, but you know, we've all been there, haven't we? While we have a little think about whether or not you've ever been desperate enough to give someone away to goblins, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment with a theory, a confirmed theory, I suppose, about the goblins, what they once were, and yeah, I don't want to say too much because we're going to take a break. See you in a minute, bye. Welcome back. If you didn't go anywhere, thanks for still being here. Let's get into some goblin theories. Now this is something, if you watch it, the film does imply, but the creators actually confirmed it more directly later on. And that is that the goblins are essentially lost children. Taken children. Like Toby. Children who weren't returned or rescued in time, in the time limit given by Jareth. Which makes the scenes with Toby seem so creepy, because now you're going to look at the film and be like, can I see him changing? because the time is running out by the time she gets there. Can I actually see Toby changing into a little goblin? Because he's getting more and more into it. He's laughing, he's, giggling along. He's not crying anymore. He seems a little bit alright to be there. He's being absorbed into his goblin world. If Sarah fails to get there in time, it's not just like he grows up in the castle. He becomes one of them. And honestly, that's one of the bleakest bits of lore in the whole film. Because she could just take a couple of wrong turns in that labyrinth, or not get helped out by Ludo or Hoggle, and he could literally change into one of the little goblins. Unless you think the goblins are cute, in which case it's not really that bad. But she saved him, so it's fine, I suppose, after she gave him away. Now let's talk about the ending, because this is the big one. Sarah doesn't defeat Jareth with strength. She doesn't defeat him with a sword. She defeats him with understanding. She says the line, "You know you have no power over me." And I know it's become this iconic, empowering quote, which, yes, absolutely, we love this. But within fairy logic, this isn't just a pep talk. This is legally binding. Fairy authority exists because you participate in it, because you believe in it, because you submit. The second Sarah withdraws consent, his claim collapses. And you can see when she's falling away and they're going back to the real world, it literally does look like a collapse. Jareth doesn't die, he doesn't change, he doesn't have any redemption arc. He just loses the contest. And again, Terry Jones has talked about this. Jareth can tempt and trick and delay, but he can't win unless Sarah gives in, gives him consent, gives him permission, and says yes. Which we all know, we love Jareth. We love Jareth because he respects consent. So good on you, boyo. But not good for stealing babies. But the consent bit, that's grand. And it's why the ending is so kind of anticlimactic and matter of fact. It's not like a big romantic ending. It's not a love broke the spell. It is a self-awareness broke the spell. She goes back to her world in a completely normal way, but it is her normal world. Nothing has changed except for her inside, what she has gained during the journey. It's a real consequence. It's a real world. It's not, crazy magical ta-da ending. It's just a real ending. And then we all get to sit there and listen to some smashing David Bowie songs while the credits roll. So I think it's a win-win for everyone. So was the Labyrinth real? Yes. Yes, it was. It's canon. It's creator confirmed. It's consistent with fairy folklore rules. But it also mirrors Sarah and Sarah's journey. It tests her weaknesses. It reflects her feelings. It tempts her with the version of adulthood she thinks she wants, while slowly showing her what she actually needs. It doesn't exist because she invented it. It exists because she stumbled into it. We see a few times through the film, Jareth tries to get that consent with giving her what she thinks she wants. She doesn't want to grow up. That's the whole point of the film. She doesn't want the responsibility of looking after the baby. She just wants to go around in her costumes, do her acting with her giant dog, and, be happy in life. And she thinks that growing up's going to take all that away from her. So Jareth says, hey, you can have your costumes, your big white ball gown, and you can live in your childhood bedroom forever in the trash heap if you really want to. But Sarah realises that no, she can't have all these things forever because she has to be responsible. She has to get to Toby and she has to grow up. And that's what she takes from the labyrinth with her. The labyrinth is still there. Jareth is still there ruling it. And it still exists. Just because she's not in it doesn't mean it stops existing. And that's why the ending isn't goodbye forever. It's a should you need us. I was going to go straight into the outro here, the wrap up, but I thought it would be cute to put in some facts about behind the scenes from the film. So here we go. Fact number 1. David Bowie didn't do the crystal ball tricks. This is one that I feel most fans will know because it's one of the most famous ones, and I'm pretty sure there's actual videos or at least photos online of this being done. But there is actually a professional crystal ball performer that is an actual profession, performed to the sleight of hand, and sometimes he was literally hidden behind David Bowie as they were filming so that it looked like it was David's hand doing the tricks. But it's not him. And going on from that, not really going to call it a new fact, but David also had a body double for the Escher staircase visuals because they needed like different perspectives and two people at the same time kind of being on the stairs. So they also used a body double for him for that. So he had multiple hand and body double things going on. Fact number 2 always makes me smile. Fact number 2, baby Toby is actually Brian Froud's real son, who is also called Toby. So baby Toby was played by Toby Froud, who is real life son of Brian Froud, the fantasy artist who designed the Labyrinth world and the creatures. So the Goblin King is literally kidnapping the concept artist baby because he knew too much. He knew too much about the fairy kingdom, and the fairy kings come to get his son. But yeah, it was Toby Froud. Talking of sons, fact number 3, Hoggle was performed by Jim Henson's son, Brian. So, very family affair going on the set of Labyrinth. George Lucas helped cut the film in editing. This is a big one, explains why the pacing feels like a hybrid of dreamy fairy tale and adventure film. George Lucas was an executive producer and helped heavily during editing. Jim Henson even described their different approaches. Lucas tightened action and dialogue, while Henson preferred a slightly more lyrical rhythm. Well, of course he does. He plays with puppets for a living. So he's going to want, he's not really going to be into action, is he? The owl. The opening owl is one of the things you might not even clock as CGI because it's subtle and brief, but it's often noted as an early example of a realistic CGI animal in a film. And it was very early CGI, but I think it works because you can tell it's not. There's something like uncanny valley about the owl, and I think it makes it more fantasy that the owl doesn't. There's something not quite right with it, and I think that fits perfectly into the film and the vibe that they're going for. But it is CGI; it's not an actual animal. And from a human side of the set, there was a lot of retakes, because the puppets were so technical. And Brian Henson has spoken very recently about David Bowie behind the scenes being very relaxed and playful and patient and upbeat, even when it meant restarting shots over and over and over because the puppets went haywire or broke or did their own little thing. So I think that's really cute because sometimes you don't always see or hear what it was like on the set of films that we grew up with as children. Nowadays, it's really this social media. You literally can't go on social media if you know something that you want to watch is coming out because there will be behind the scenes footage released, spoilers, etc. Whereas when we were children, there was none of that. If you were lucky, you got a VHS or a DVD that had an extras bit on it and it had sort of like a behind the scenes or making of documentary. I loved those as kids. And that was what we got, that was what we had. So it's really nice to hear things from the sets of films we watched because we don't have everything that is recorded now for films. So I like that one. I wanted to put it in. But having said that, there is an official making of documentary for the Labyrinth called Inside the Labyrinth, which I'm sure you can probably find on the internet somewhere. It's probably on YouTube, I would have thought. So if you do want to have a look behind the scenes, there is actually an official documentary for this specific film. So go watch it. I've just listened back to that bit about our childhood, my childhood, while I'm editing, and I sound like that meme where it's like, back in our day, we walked uphill to school both ways in sleet and snow. Like really old people when they say how much different and how terrible their life was back in the day and how lucky kids are and they don't know how lucky they've got it. That's exactly what I sound like. Now I'm going to go do the wrap up. So once you've walked uphill both ways, you can meet me over at the wrap up. So we have answered the question by canon and law, is the labyrinth real? Yes, it is. It's still there. Sarah's just not in it. But we still have questions. Where did Jareth come from? Did he create the labyrinth for Sarah? Like, is Sarah's contract and bargain the labyrinth? Or is the labyrinth there for everyone? Like, if someone else did the bargain and went in, would it still be the Labyrinth? Or would their fairy contract look different? Would they have a different challenge that fitted them and challenged them to get through? Who is the first baby to have been taken and turned into a goblin? Why does he have so many? Who else's babies has he taken? We have many questions, and I do believe that some of the things that have been fan-made, such as the comics, etc., do go into this. So if you would like some of those answers, maybe you can read those. But they aren't canon. So if you're only interested in official answers, I'm afraid I just don't really have any for you. Apart from the Labyrinth being real, because, I've proved it. Done. Ticked it off. Done, mate. We've done it, lads. You can really tell when I get to the non-scripted parts of the podcast because it's just me rambling on. Thank you very much for hanging out with me again today and for listening to my ramblings. I appreciate you more than you know, and if you haven't checked out episode 1 already, please go and do so. If you've listened to both already and you want more, please follow on whatever platform you are listening on. And check out the website, especially if you want any more information on any of the podcast episodes, because usually there is a post to go alongside them that will have more info, where I got my sources from, etc. In the meantime, please don't go making any contracts with any fairy folk, and I will see you here next time. I appreciate you so much. Bye bye.